Today, we're going to be speaking with Steve Schmidt, who's a renowned American political strategist, formerly of the 2008 McCain campaign and many other campaigns, founder of The Warning, a newsletter, podcast, and YouTube channel as well. Steve, great to have you on. I appreciate your time.
Good to be with you. My pleasure.
So where are you on the Republican Party at this point in time? I'm curious because your views have certainly evolved over time. I mean, our audience may or may not know about them.
Well, I founded the Lincoln Project in 2020 to oppose Donald Trump. I was Arnold Schwarzenegger's campaign manager. I was a top strategist for George W. Bush. I served in the Bush White House. But I have always recognized that Donald Trump was a profound threat to the Republic, along with every other person in the Republican Party. The difference is a few of us, when we said never, meant it. And overwhelmingly, as in 99.99% of every person involved in the institutional Republican Party allowed themselves to capitulate, appease what I regard as the most dangerous threat that the country has faced internally since the Civil War, and what I view the Republican Party as in a two-party system in this country is a profound threat that has been hijacked by a faction that has turned against fundamental American concepts such as democracy and pluralism, and all of it is deeply ground in walking away from the results of an election. And last thing I'll say about that, I'm the person who placed the phone call for John McCain to Barack Obama. I was the first Republican in America to say the words, "Congratulations, Mr. President-elect," before I handed the phone to him. And so this is elemental in a free society, and that's what the party's walked away from.
So as far as policy goes, I mean, are you still like a low tax guy? You want to reduce abortion, or have your views also changed over time?
I was a moderate Republican from New Jersey, right? So the Northeastern tradition of Republicanism was not ideological. It wasn't Southern. It wasn't evangelical. The Republican Party in the Northeastern states was a reform party, and it typically took power after the excesses of the machine-run, party-controlled Democrats of those states. So you always had non-ideological Republicans, Jacob Javits, Christie Whitman, Tom Kean in New Jersey, that ran on records of environmentalism. I've always supported a woman's right to choose, and I was one of the very earliest people with any profile in the country to come out in favor of gay marriage in the Republican Party. I worked for the ACLU leading the marriage equality campaigns. I don't think that you can look seriously into a camera as a Republican and say, hey, this is a fiscally conservative party. There is no fiscally conservative party in America. You have two wildly spending political parties that have accumulated $32 trillion in national debt. If you look at the baby boomer presidencies, Bill Clinton was the most fiscally responsible. Barack Obama was number 2. George Bush was number 3, and Donald Trump was the wildest spender of them all.
You mentioned New Jersey. You know, when I look at the Republican primary field now as a guy from the progressive left, it seems so obvious to me that Chris Christie is by far the most competent and qualified person running in that primary. And if you said to me, David, the next president will be someone currently running in the Republican primary, it would be so obvious to me that Chris Christie would be my choice. He's polling 1%. Okay, we don't yet have polling from after his announcement. What is your sense of whether there is any desire among the current Republican Party for someone like a Chris Christie?
Well, I think it is a mistake for people to look at Chris Christie and just to blithely say he has no chance. Reality is, in order to win the Republican nomination, you have to win somewhere first. So when you look at this right now, Could Tim Scott win in Iowa? Tim Scott can win in Iowa. I think he's the only person who can beat Trump in Iowa who's in the field right now. Can Chris Christie win in New Hampshire? Is it possible? If you look at Chris Christie's town hall from the other night, and you look, for example, at Tim Ryan's town hall that he did on Fox News, and he basically said many of the same things that Chris Christie did. You watch that Fox audience and people's faces are contorted and twisted in anger as he's telling them, right, that Trump lost the election. You have the guy with the MAGA hat. No, we saw the Trump town hall on CNN when people are cheering because Trump had just been found guilty of sexual abuse and
Right.
defamation. Right. You didn't see any of that in that audience in New Hampshire, right, of people who turned out to Chris Christie, right? If you watch that closely on a body language perspective, those people are not rejecting what he's saying. So now, however it is that Chris got there, right, over 7 long years, and I'm just gonna skip that whole part of it because I think it's tedious. We all know his record, his Stepford wife appearance, but he's the only person in the race, such as it is, who's just telling the truth right now. Now, he hasn't always been truthful on these issues, to say the least, but right in the race right now, he's our guy. He's your guy. He's my guy, because he's the only guy who's saying things that heretofore no one has said to these audiences. Any person who's running have lived in a delusion sphere, and good for Chris Christie. Better late than never is a saying for a reason, that he's bringing up the manifest corruption and all the other issues. Is he flawed? Of course he is flawed, but he's the best that they got right now, and there is a truth teller in the race, and that hasn't been the case. The only group that has ever confronted him effectively is the group that I started. It indisputably drew blood in the 6th year of Trump's presence on the national stage.
So
and I hope Chris Christie can do that.
In terms of the other non-Trump people that are running, we've seen pretty significant hesitation to really go after Trump. Christie in his town hall was direct, and he said the path to the nomination is through Trump, and Trump's going to try to go through me. I'm going to try to go through him. With everybody else, Nikki Haley early on would basically just chalk it up to, I'm a woman and I'm younger and I'm a person of color. And Tim Scott, when he was given the opportunity to really draw distinctions with Trump, sort of said the contrast is going to be clear, and what exactly he meant by that, I don't know what he meant. DeSantis is starting to criticize Trump a little, but it seems that there's this idea that if they are there and then Trump gets arrested 3 more times and maybe it pulls him off the campaign trail, they will be able to swoop in and somehow pick up Trump supporters by virtue of not having really attacked Trump at this early stage. Is that viable? And number 2, if it is, it can't be viable for all of them. It seems maybe for one of them that would work.
It's not viable for any of them. Look, at the end of the day, it's a position that's rooted in a fundamental delusional dishonesty. And if you look at what a presidential contest is, the race for the presidency in the United States is the greatest non-lethal competition in the world. There is nothing like it. There is no game. There is no sport. There is nothing that is as intense, as focused as this. And so what this is, as David Axelrod once said, is an MRI for the soul, right? This is a character test. And so each of these people, right, put aside their beliefs, their ideology, their political label. They're weak and they're afraid. They're terrified of being tweeted about by Donald Trump. Mike Pence's race has no rationale whatsoever. His former boss, the president, tried to have him hung. And he just now will only say, well, he endangered me and others and my family.
Yep.
The American people in our full range of our vast menagerie, right, of beliefs and everything else. From left to right, the American people will not vote for weaklings, will not vote for spinelessness, right? So every one of these people, and exclusively, right, they're all the people that played a previous role as Trump sycophants who won't tell the truth about him now. What they prove is their softness, and it's disqualifying. So all of these people, whether it's the North Dakota governor, who could, let's say, right, and I've never seen the guy, I couldn't pick him out of a lineup. I don't know if he's good or not, he can talk or not, but could there be a reform-minded governor from a small state in the tradition of a Jimmy Carter in 1976? Is there space for that in the Republican Party? There is. But you asked the North Dakota governor, right? Well, what about his claims about the stolen election? Right? What about him saying this? He won't say a word. It's like he's in the witness protection program, right? He's like facing down Pablo Escobar at trial. He won't, nada, right? And it's disqualifying.
When it comes to the economy, there's been this idea for a long time in American politics that when you look at a re-election of a sitting president, so much of it is guided by the state of the economy. However, there's this strange thing happening right now where on Monday I looked at every indicator that's usually used. How has the stock market been doing? What's the unemployment rate, job creation numbers, GDP, inflation, trade balance, right? We look at all of it. It all looks pretty okay, unremarkable, or like pretty good. And yet, all the time on my YouTube channel, I see comments from people saying, you're worried because the economy's a disaster. Biden has failed on the economy. And when I say, well, show me a metric that proves that, people will write to me. They'll say, well, if you compare wages to housing costs, we're looking pretty deep here to find something that would point to an economy that's not at minimum okay, if not cruising along pretty well. What's your view on this issue? Maybe not so much about the state of the economy, but the disconnect about even if the metrics look fine, the story is still that the economy is terrible.
What I would say about that is what you're talking about is the difference between emotion and rationality, right? And so the question you're asking is a question about a feeling, right? Not a question about the weather, right? So you go outside, it's 85 degrees and sunny, and someone says this is a terrible day. You look at them and you say it's obviously not. It's a beautiful day, right? But this is much more subjective, right? So first off, and you look at some of the ratings decline on cable, for example, cable news. It makes perfect sense. I mean, 80% of the people that appear on CNN, for example, on any given day are appearing from Washington, D.C. And almost none of those people make under a couple of $1 million a year. So they are in a place that is detached from reality. They live in a rarefied air, and there is a lack of appreciation across the board for the fact that 40% of the country doesn't have $400 cash available, that enormous percentages of the E1, 2, 3, E4 ranks in the military deal with food insecurity issues. Go look at the payday lending outside of a military base. Does any normal person have access to a return on the stock market in the sense of here's a stock, this company has a value, it's going to grow? This is all computer trading against algorithms at the edge of a moment of profound disruption caused by technology, globalization, and there's a lack of an animating vision that communicates to people what's going to happen next. So I think that all of Biden's deficiencies in a political sense are rooted in an awful failure of communications. And that is very, very worrying, right? If you're a football team, you have to throw the ball. If you're the president of the United States running for re-election in a fraught time against a massive, 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 massive misinformation, propaganda network, all of it put together, you have to communicate like Tom Brady throws that football. And even the most generous fan of the president has to understand, has to appreciate that there is a massive communication deficit. And the evidence of that is that this radical extremist anti-American movement has not been crushed politically. It's still alive, and it's still in a position to take power. And this next election has to be the place where it's put away for good.
We've been speaking with political strategist Steve Schmidt. He is the founder of The Warning, and we will link to the newsletter, podcast, and YouTube channel. Steve, really appreciate your time and insights today.
My pleasure to be with you.